Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. This evening, we're here with a new mentee, Michael. I actually don't know how to pronounce your last name, Michael. How do you say it?
Kihanya.
Kihanya. Michael Kihanya. Well, welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Can you share a little bit about yourself and just really briefly, like your career path and what you're working on now, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I graduated last year from university. I studied neuroscience, which is a bit of a weird jump into coding, but I kind of got the entrepreneurial itch, I guess earlier in 2024, January 2024, and I really wanted to become more technical. And so I started the Odin project in
Hmm.
January. I finished the foundations course in about 2 months, and then after that, I chose the Ruby on Rails path. And right now, I'm in the midst of the Ruby section, so lots of learning Ruby and just an introduction for me to object-oriented programming.
Okay. I'm actually learning about neural networks and deep learning right now. And so I find myself like wishing that I had a stronger understanding of neuroscience.
Mm,
That's kind of funny. Um, yeah, okay. So you mentioned wanting to look at some like object-oriented programming type stuff. Can you kind of share what the project is that you're working on, stuff like that?
yeah, so I'm working on a tic-tac-toe project. The specifications are essentially two human players playing tic-tac-toe game on the command line, and a
Okay.
winner should be declared or a tie should be declared by the end of the game.
Okay.
Um, and the Odin project suggested that we just did a bunch of reading on OOP, so they suggested, you know, use some classes, use some modules as you see fit. So I've been trying to implement that into building the tic-tac-toe game. Um,
Okay.
mhm.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing your code and talking about it with you. I'll preface this by saying I found that a lot of the OOP education out there is just complete bullshit, and there's a good chance that you've been steered in unproductive directions.
Okay,
So, uh,
I hear
uh,
that, and I went to a meetup last night, and I showed a couple people my code, and they were just kind of baffled about the fact that I was using OOP even to build a game like Tic-Tac-Toe.
hmm,
Um, but I'm a newbie, and so I'm just kind of like if they tell me to do it, I'm gonna do my best to do it and kind of execute on that. Um,
yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we have another joiner here. Oh, maybe a couple people. Okay. No, it's just one person. Bear with me a second while I
sure.
admit the new guest here. Hey, Roger, welcome.
Hey, buddy.
Um, okay. Sorry, Michael, I got lost. Were we about to have you share your screen? Is that what we're gonna do?
Yeah, if we wanted to dive into the project, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that would be great. Um, oh yeah, and just another comment, like it's funny that some people were like baffled that you were using OOP for this project. I'm not terribly surprised by that. And I found that like out in the industry, I mentioned that a lot of the education around OOP is bad. Also in the
Mm-hmm.
industry, the practices tend to be pretty poor. And
Mm-hmm.
people think they're doing OOP when really they're doing like procedural code wrapped in object syntax. And it's a real shit show out there.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I read all the things that Odin Project gave me. I was like, I know what a class is now. Sweet. Okay, let's try and build a game. And that's where the result that I'm going to show you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's take a look.
Yeah.
Roger, I saw you pointing toward yourself as I was talking just now. What was your meaning there?
You were saying about how it's procedural, and I actually found, uh, Michael, I don't know where you are in your journey at all, but
Mm,
I totally found that for me, the only way to get away, like to really get like a much higher level, was to build like a deeply involved personal project. Because there's like no book you can read. Like you're reading it, and it's like, yeah, like one of my favorites that everybody knows is Sandy Metz, and you're like, yeah, this makes sense,
Yeah.
but you can't internalize it. Like,
Yeah.
I think I can, but out comes procedural code.
Right.
And like once you get like deep in, then you're like, well, this is bad, and then your brain is forced to make like the mental shift, and
Yeah, I
that's
don't know. I don't know if I've made that mental shift yet. I don't know. We'll see. You can be the judge of that, I guess. But th to give you some context, I'm like a couple months into the Odin project. Um, like
nice.
learned OOP about a month ago. Very new to coding, so yeah, that's where I'm at.
So you learned what it is about a
Yeah,
month ago.
yeah, I learned what it is. Yeah, I learned what it is exactly. So this is the project.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, one more comment before we dive into this.
Go ahead.
This is heretical, but like that Sandy Metz book you mentioned, everybody knows it, everybody loves it. I don't really think it's that great. Like there's good stuff in it, but a lot of the like object-oriented related stuff, like I don't remember it because it was like years since I've read it, but I remember going through it and just being like, this to me is questionable. Um, so I say that partly because Michael, you will probably hear that book praised as gospel, but take that with a
Hmm.
grain of salt because at least for me, this is really a minority opinion, but at least for me, I'm not so sure about that.
Okay.
So I actually have something interesting to add to that, if I may, Jason.
Yeah.
Michael, this is actually one of the reasons why I like Jason, is because he actually approaches it differently. And so from my point of view as a third party, I actually like hearing people like her that are followers of that sort of path. And I like hearing people like Jason, because I actually think listening to both of them makes you stronger.
Right.
So I don't, you know what I mean? Like I don't make it, I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, you know what? I think about it, I'm like, yeah, this might be the best way." And I try to actually blend like different great good thinkers about this stuff. That's what I try to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I've
think that's
I've
a yeah, go ahead,
yeah, I've
Michael.
been trying to do the same. I've been trying to do the same as much as possible, and to my level of understanding is get as many opinions as possible, um, and analogies to help me understand what OOP is.
Totally.
Um, okay, yeah, without further ado, let's dive into the code here. So I see this is called main.rb. Can you just take me through let's take a scroll through this file if we may.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to get a
Uh,
feel for the high level overview of the thing. Okay.
yeah.
Um, we have another new joiner here. Welcome, Hassan.
Hey.
Okay. So I'll share a couple high level thoughts, Michael.
Yeah.
Um, so I what I would ideally like to see when I open a file like this, because this is obviously like the starting point for the whole program.
Hmm.
Um, Ideally, you can open this file and see kind of high level description of what's happening.
Okay.
Um, there's layers of abstraction, and I think of it kind of like a pyramid. This main.rb file could be considered the tip of the pyramid. And so
Hmm.
I'd maybe like to see the highest level of abstraction in that main file. And you can get a rough understanding for what's happening. And then if you want to or need to have an understanding of finer grain details, you can be like, okay, I see this other class referenced or whatever. Let's go deeper. You go one layer of abstraction deeper. Things are
Okay.
finer grained there. And it's kind of like fractal, like at each layer of abstraction, it makes use of yet finer grained things until you get to the very bottom.
Okay.
So I think that's maybe what we kind of want to work towards because obviously when we open this here, we see low level details.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so looking at this, the task that I have now is to take in these low level details and try to synthesize the higher level meaning based on that. And that's a lot of like mental work to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Preferably, I don't have to do that mental work. Preferably, you as the author has done the work for me
Right.
where you tuck away those low level details and only present me with the high level points.
Okay. Okay. And do you mean that in terms of like writing a comment at the top of the file, or do you mean that also, or maybe you mean both, in terms of hiding the code that is levels of abstraction beneath the highest point?
Yeah, let's see. I could maybe answer that question best with an example. Um, First of all, I definitely don't mean a comment.
Okay.
I'm ideally, because comments can get out of sync with the working code,
Mm-hmm.
and ideally, it's kind of like a comments tend to compensate for code that's not as clear as it could be. And so
Mm.
instead of adding that compensating comment, it's usually better if you can to just make the code itself easier to understand. So let's scroll down a little bit more. Okay, back up a little bit. Okay, so here's an example. I see on line 26 this board array thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so that communicates to me that there's a concept in this application of a board. And so maybe um, maybe there's just a value initialized that's called board. And I don't have to care about position one's state or position two state or these underscores or pipes or anything like that.
Right.
Those are like lower level details and I probably want to have to care about when I'm looking at such a high level file as this.
Okay.
I would rather just see that there's a board because that's important. I probably should know that there's a board. That's appropriate for
Mm-hmm.
me to know at this level of abstraction. But maybe it's
Yeah.
not so appropriate for me to know the nitty-gritty details of how that board is made to be.
Right. So that could be, I think, something you're saying that we could hide in a class or a module or something like that in a separate file.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And also
Can I say
I
something?
yeah, go ahead, Roger.
Michael, I think it's helpful to internalize maybe a visual, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
think of being like you're sitting on a motorcycle seat. All you see is the start button, two brakes, and an accelerator. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
but there's a lot of stuff happening. And that's
Uh-huh.
what James is saying. Like there's a lot of
I
stuff
see.
happening. And main is you sitting on the bike.
Yeah.
So like, what are the key elements do you need at the very top level to
Okay.
operate a bike? That's it.
Okay.
Only thing that should be in main. Jason, do you think that's a fair simplification?
I think so. Yeah, I think
Okay.
that fits.
Okay.
So maybe the question is to build off of what Jason's saying and thinking of that abstraction, what do you think should be in main now that you've thought
Mm.
that, just at a high level?
Yeah, I think
To be fair,
the
I think that might be a really hard question to answer. You can try if you want to, Michael, but I think that might be really tough.
well, there's definitely regions where I think the board array is one of them. I think this wow, I think doesn't need to be in this main RB as well. Um, or even honestly, this section as well. Um, I think some of this could become a function or a method and be moved elsewhere. Um, that's my initial thoughts.
Okay. Um, Another question for you. I assume, like, based on what you've told us so far about your experience level, you probably haven't had a lot of exposure yet to automated testing.
No, not really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it might be a good idea to get comfortable with that like really early on.
Okay.
Um, Even if you don't end up practicing automated testing full on, there's certain principles that are connected to it that I think would really help you.
Okay.
Um, okay, so if we may, can we open up just like a blank file to take some notes in?
Yeah, sure.
Probably a good habit to have one of those all the time, and
Okay.
then ignore standard ignore.
Yeah, agreed. Um, okay, so I mentioned that the education around OOP tends to be pretty poor out there. Testing
Mm-hmm.
is even worse. It's really hard to find good education around testing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
working on trying to help in that area. Um, but I'll share some things that unfortunately you probably won't encounter in a lot of other places. But by the way, I'm working on a new book called Professional Rails Testing, and if I remember, I'll send you my manuscript that I have so far. It's not finished yet, but there's at least in there enough in there that you might find it useful. Um, but I think of tests as being executable specifications. And that's certainly not an original idea to me, but I think it's a very helpful mindset to have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of developers who are new to automated testing, they open up a test file and they're looking at a blank screen and they get writer's block and they don't know what tests to write. It's one of the most common questions for beginners is what do I write tests for and how do I write them?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's kind of like that's the question that just arises out of like I totally have no idea what to do at all, which is
Mm-hmm.
understandable because most testing tutorials focus on like the syntax of the tools and stuff like that rather than the
Mm-hmm.
principles behind testing.
All right.
Anyway, you can think of tests as executable specifications. Um, and a specification to me is like a scenario, one or more scenarios, and then the behavior that we expect in that scenario. Yeah. And like I said before, like you don't even have to be practicing automated testing for these ideas to be helpful because a really big problem in programming in general is people don't decide what to do before they do it. They like have an
Mm-hmm.
idea and then they just like start coding. But it's like, hang on a second, like what are we actually shooting for? What exactly are we trying to do? And so like if you decide at least some of what you're gonna try to do before you try to start doing it, it's gonna go more smoothly than if you just fly by the seat of your pants.
Okay.
Yeah. So tic-tac-toe is actually, I think, kind of hard because it's somewhat graphical. Um, and so it might be a tough one to start with for something testing related, even if we're not talking about automated testing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could start with even a simpler scenario. Um, like we could do, I've done this before. We could do like a simplified version of, oh, actually, no, 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 no. Let me do a different thing. This is a different thing I've done lately, and I like it. Um, a recipe scaler.
Okay.
So the idea is you start with a recipe and you have the recipe and the factor that you want to multiply it by, and then the program outputs the new recipe. So like maybe we can write down a few examples, like 1/4 cup flour.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can probably just do 2 or 3 examples. I'll let you come up with 1 or 2 more if you want to.
It's a lot of baking soda, but
That's a lot of baking soda. Um, okay. So this is our recipe, and obviously it's not exactly a recipe, it's just a list of ingredients, but
mm-hmm.
we can imagine a program that reads this in from a file and then just like outputs the multiplied version.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so we could have like one scenario is like let's envision this scenario where we multiply the recipe by 4. So we start with like 1/4 cup of flour and then we multiply it by 4.
Mm-hmm.
And we can consider that scenario and what result we would expect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe below, let's like start a whole new section where it's like we can just title it specifications. And maybe we can add better headings later, but we can say like the scenario is that we have a 1/4 cup of flour and we multiply it by 4. Okay. And then what behavior would we expect under that scenario? Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so obviously, like the implication there is that we're not going to say 1/4 times 4 is 4/4. We're gonna we're gonna reduce it or whatever to just 1.
Right.
Can you think of some other scenarios we might want to account for?
Uh, like if we want to reduce the amount of baking soda by 1/4.
Okay.
What if 2/3 teaspoon of sugar times 4? What is that?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
1/3 teaspoon sugar.
8
Yeah.
twelfths.
So how does that come out?
You can't put 8 twelfths. Nobody will know what that is, especially the person doing the cooking in the kitchen, probably. Unless
So
they're
2/3.
I don't know about you, but I'm pretty tired at the end of the day when I'm cooking.
The 8/3. Right. Yeah. 8/3 teaspoon sugar.
Twelfths. Isn't it 8 twelfths? Oh no, it's 8/3. Yeah, sorry.
8/3. Yeah.
Okay. But you're okay with having the improper fraction?
Mm, it could be easier to test, but then this is the proper number, not the improper fraction in terms of the
Um,
1 cup flour situation. But
yeah, it's your
I could ch
choice.
I could change this, but
Okay.
Think
so
about it from the person using the cup. Eight
yeah,
thirds. What would that mean to them? I think that's what Jason's saying,
Yeah, I mean, you just
yeah,
never
yeah,
encounter improper fractions in a
yeah.
recipe.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Because
You also never encounter thirds of a teaspoon to be pedantic about it, but that's okay.
that's funny.
Um, okay. That's good. That's probably like okay to start with.
Okay.
And by the way, this is like the reason that I'm starting here is like this is the exact way that I start my book, and this in fact is the same example with this recipe scaler thing that I use in the book because this is how I'm wanting to introduce people to the idea of tests as specifications and what it means to come up with your specifications before you start implementing. So I
Mm-hmm.
think these two are good. Can you do me a favor, Michael, and just put a blank line between the first scenario and the second scenario?
Yeah,
Just to
yeah.
have, yeah, there we go. Okay. So let's actually go through the process of converting this to a test that we can run.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, so I have like in the book again, I have like a written formula that you can follow, and I might not remember it all exactly, but the first thing, and I break it down to extremely small steps. The first thing when writing a test is we have to decide where the test is going to go. Like, what's the file that the test is going to go in? First of all, obviously, we don't even have a project, but if you would, Michael, we could make a new folder for this recipe scaler project.
Yeah.
Gotta say, I like that he's using the command line,
Heck yeah.
Hmm.
right? I was totally wondering what he was doing because he wasn't even clicking the new folder button.
And a text file, what Ruby file in it, or what file?
Yeah. So I'm going to have us use RSpec as opposed to Minitest. And in RSpec, test files need to be suffixed with underscore spec. And so we can call this something underscore spec.rb.
Dot under something dot underscore spec,
Um,
or something dot rb underscore spec. Say it
sorry,
again,
this
sorry.
the suffix is underscore spec.rb. And I didn't mean something literally, but that's fine. We can
Mm.
go with that. I encourage people not to worry about getting the right answer on the first try because you can
Mm-hmm.
always change it, and it's a waste of brain power to try to think about it too much in the beginning because it'll be easier later after you've written some of the test. Um, let's make a couple minor modifications here. Instead
Okay.
of recipe hyphen test, let's do recipe underscore. Oh, and actually test and spec. That's kind of redundant. So the reason RSpec is called RSpec is because the author of RSpec also thinks of tests as executable specifications.
Okay.
And so that's why each test file is suffixed with spec. So it's kind of redundant to have test and spec. So why don't we kill the
Okay.
test part and just have recipe spec?
Okay.
Yeah. And we can kill that dot too, the dot in the middle.
Okay.
Okay.
That look good. Yeah.
Looks good. Okay, and we can open that one up. Okay, so we have our test file. The next step that I recommend is just adding the boilerplate because every test has a little bit of boilerplate that's not unique. You just have to get it out of the way. So let's add that. Um, so capital R, capital S, R spec. Oh, you must have Copilot.
Uh, I got something. Is
Okay.
this all right, or do we want to do it a different way?
Um, that's fine. It's yeah, actually that's fine. Okay, so in this describe, we can just put recipe scaler. Surely we'll want to change that later, but we can start with that. And this actually takes a string. So instead of recipe underscore scalar there, let's wrap that in quotes. Yeah. Okay. And then we can actually delete the guts of this. We can just have describe recipe scalar and that's all. Okay. So now we have our boilerplate. And then the next step that I do is I actually run this empty test. And the reason I do that is because if there's anything wrong with the boilerplate or anything like that, I just want to get that stuff out of the way. I don't want to write some of the substance of the test and then discover like part way in that something's wrong. I'd rather just make sure that I'm starting on a solid foundation right from the start.
Okay.
All right. And the way we actually will run this is to do RSpec recipe spec instead of Ruby recipe spec. Okay. Said no examples found. That is not surprising because we didn't create any. All right. And the next step I would suggest is to take one of those scenarios and just literally copy and paste it into the test file. Yeah, and actually right inside of that describe block there. Okay. And then let's comment it out so that the test is still valid. Okay. And the reason I suggest this is because my intention at every step is to lower the cognitive burden to the minimum that it can possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, what's the smallest step we could take from where we were just now to here? Well, we can just paste in the scenario in English, and then we can at least be looking at it in the same file.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we can convert this specification to a test. So I assume, well, maybe you've encountered this, but I don't know. Have you encountered like RSpec, any RSpec syntax at all so far?
Like a little bit. It was a while ago though. I
Okay.
don't really remember it.
I'll just assume you don't know anything, and apologies if I tell you something you already know.
It's correct
Um,
for now, yeah.
okay. Um, so the outermost block here is a describe block. As you can see, we will nest one inside here called a context block.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the syntax will be context and then a string describing what we want. So we can just put 1/4 cup flour times 4. Yeah, and then do and then end. Okay. So when I was first getting started with testing in Ruby, I found this syntax to be pretty mysterious. I didn't understand what I was looking at.
Mm.
And the explanation for this is actually not simple. And so if we like tried to go down that road right now, we would like get dragged off in a totally different direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to have us do that, but if you want to understand this better, the thing to understand for like the background knowledge is Ruby blocks.
Okay.
And one thing I'll mention really quick is that describe and context, they're both just functions. So let's even do this with describe. Let's replace the space after describe with a left parentheses. And then after the string, we'll put a right parentheses. And then same with context. And let's kill that space after context. Okay. So obviously we haven't like totally solved all the mysteries. There's probably still a lot more you would like to understand about this, but hopefully that at least illustrates that describe and context are both functions.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah. Um, and I'll also say that you're familiar with the idea that you can pass values to a function or method. I'm going to use the word method. You can pass values to a method, but in Ruby and other languages, you can also pass behavior. So a block is a way of passing behavior to a method. So that's what we're doing with this do and end. We're calling the describe method and we're passing recipe scalar and we're also passing this block of behavior. And then with context, we're passing that string and then we're passing a block of behavior.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've described our scenario and now let's describe what we expect under this scenario. Um, and I think we could actually stand to get a little more precise with our language. So the scenario 1/4 cup times 4, what is like what is like the generalized version? What is the generalized idea that this scenario is representing?
Three more people come over for dinner and you want to quadruple your recipe.
Okay. Um, but like mathematically, what is the scenario that we're trying to capture by taking 1/4 times 4?
Well, mathematically,
Yeah.
1/4, like times four. I'm not sure.
Okay. Um, well, we probably wouldn't bother to say that 1/4 times 3 gives us 3/4 because there's nothing special about that. But we are bothering to say that 1/4 times 4 isn't 4/4, but it's 1. Like, what's significant about this specific number?
It's a whole number, not a fraction.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the term for that is reducible fraction. I had to look that up. But I think
Okay.
when we take 1/4, multiply it by 4 and get 4/4, I think we call that a reducible fraction. So
Okay.
how about we actually explicitly say that the scenario is a reducible fraction. Yeah. And if we think a little more about it, like the way we get there is kind of incidental. Like the part that we really care about is that 4/4 becomes 1. Like the 1/4 times 4 part, that comes before. That's not actually so relevant to us. All we care about is that 4/4 becomes 1.
Hmm.
So maybe for us, we could blow away that entire scenario and say, we can say a reducible fraction like 4/4. Um, no, we could say the scenario is when we have a reducible fraction like 4/4. Yeah. And the expected behavior, of course, is that it gets converted to 1. Bless you.
Oh, forgot I didn't mute it.
Yeah. Um, and actually, we can be even more precise with our language and say 4/4 gets reduced to 1.
Okay.
Okay. Now, for our context, we can replace that old description with our new one when we have a reducible fraction like 4/4. Okay, and then within we can put an it block. So we can say the block is the same syntactical format, we can just say it gets reduced to 1. Okay. Okay. And as silly as it may seem, I would actually run this test even though there's nothing in it, just so we know that there's no errors in here that we're going to be surprised by later. Okay. Okay, and now that our comment has done its job of helping us move along, we can get rid of it because it's now redundant. Okay, now let's just pause for a second and take a breath and take stock of what we've done. Um, it might sound silly, but Michael, can you just read this test to us?
Describe recipe scalar. Do context when we have a reducible fraction like 4/4, it gets reduced to 1.
Okay. Okay. And what would you say your comfort level is with what we have so far?
9 out
Like,
of 10. Good. Yeah.
okay, you feel like you understand it and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, now the question is what do we actually put in the blank? Um, it's okay if the answer is no, but any idea what we put here?
Uh, no.
Um, the way that I like to do this is to kind of design the code from the outside in. So obviously we haven't written anything at all for this little project. Um, so there's no code we could possibly write that could refer to our program because it doesn't exist. But we can work from the outside in and like write the code that we would like to exist. And then when we run the test, we'll get an error, of course, but then we can backfill that code and make it work. So here's an idea. We could we could conceive of a concept called a recipe line item,
Okay.
and we could initialize a recipe line item with a value of 4/4 for the quantity. So why don't you take a swing at that? It's okay if we don't get it right on the first try, but you can initialize an object called whatever you want to call it. Oh no, let's not even define anything. We'll just
Okay.
refer to it in the test as if it actually already exists, even though it doesn't.
Okay. Recipe item.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, recipe item equals recipe item dot new. Okay. And then for the recipe item dot new, let's do it in camel case, as if it were a class. Yeah.
Okay.
And then inside of recipe item dot new, we can pass quantity colon 4/4. Okay. And then we can add an assertion. We can say expect.
Expect.
And expect is a method, so we can put parentheses, and inside of expect, we can pass recipe item dot quantity. Okay, and then after expect, we can do dot to. Sorry, after the like outside the parentheses.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, space EQ, and then in quotes the number 1.
EQ question mark? Or
No
just
question
EQ?
mark.
Okay.
Yeah, and don't forget to put the quotes around the 1. Okay. So let's just pause here a second. How do you feel about those two lines we just wrote in terms of like understanding it?
Good. So we're creating a new object that has a quantity of 4 fourths. The recipe item is a quantity of 4 fourths, and we're expecting the quantity of that recipe item, or we're asserting whether or not it's equal to 1, the quantity of that recipe item.
Yeah. Yeah. And basically, like on the way in, it's 4 fourths. On the way out, it's just one.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So let's
Okay.
run that. And what do you think's going to happen when we run it?
Mm, an error, or we don't have a file or code to check with anything, right?
Yeah. So let's run that and see what happens. My expectation is the same as yours. Okay. Uninitialized constant recipe item. Not surprising, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what we can do now is we can write just enough code to make the failure message go away.
Okay.
And to make life even easier on ourselves, we could even just put this recipe item class. We can define the class right in the same file.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, that's too much.
Too much? Okay.
Yeah, because all we're trying to do is make the current error message go away. We're not trying to make the test pass. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is again to lower the cognitive burden. It takes less thinking to make the error message go away than it does to make the test pass. And then the
Mm-hmm.
other reason is to avoid coding speculatively. This is a huge problem in programming, very common problem where people write code without being sure that it's really needed. And then you
Mm.
end up with all this code in a code base that's just kind of cruft. And
Okay.
every piece of code in a code base has a cost. And so if you're going to add a code, if you're going to add code and incur more cost, that cost should be justified. It's not smart to add a cost with no justification, no, no payoff for that cost.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And if we never write more than is necessary than to just make the current failure message go away, then we can avoid coding speculatively.
Okay.
So
This
let's
is
run that.
you see
Yeah,
this a
run
lot
it.
with optimization. And I'm not talking about like, oh, make this widget faster, but that's a good one. But what we see it on is, yeah, but like in 3 months we're going to need this other thing, and then, oh, and but then after that we're going to need this other thing. So then they build this monster thing that does all this stuff, and then
Mm.
in 3 months inevitably 90% of what you thought needed to be built didn't need to be built. You spent 6 weeks building something that could have been done in a week.
Yeah.
And then in 3 months, they would have said, you need to do this thing. We need this. Then you would have spent 2 days adding that. And then you see how much extra production you had.
Right.
You see it in real life when you go to new like campuses and stuff where they don't put any sidewalks and they watch where all the humans go and then they put the sidewalks in.
Mm.
Why do you need to put the sidewalks in first? Why do you need to plan them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's a good visual cue of like what programmers do all the time. They build the sidewalks all the time, and they shouldn't build the sidewalks. And that, I
Yeah, I
think
see. I see.
that's what
Yeah.
I tell you.
It's a very good point. All right, so what do we get when we run this again? Okay. And what's your interpretation of that error message, Michael?
Um, in the test, we're expecting some argument to be given, or we're saying that there should be some argument, but in our class definition, there's no arguments in terms of initializing the object.
Okay. And do you have a feel for how we might make that error message go away?
Yeah, I think I was preemptively doing it before, so we'll
Yeah,
see.
okay.
Um,
Yeah, you just want the colon after instead of before.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Oh, no, this recipe item definition, this is your application code. This isn't part of your test code. So we don't want to hard code anything there.
okay.
Yeah.
So, and then,
Well, you don't need that, right?
oh
Because
yeah,
what you
right.
just wrote is enough to make the failure go away. And don't forget
Okay.
to add back your colon at the end there.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is because it's a symbol, just a side question.
Mm-hmm.
You're reversing where the colon are. Can you explain the colon to me in this context?
Yeah, that can be a nuance that like is hard to get straight until you've seen it a lot. Um, so a Ruby method can take two kinds of arguments, positional arguments or what's the term? Keyword arguments. Positional arguments or keyword arguments. So positional arguments is the kind that you're probably most used to seeing where it's just first, second, third, and
Yeah.
it depends on the order. Um, Keyword arguments is this kind of key value structure, and it looks just like a hash.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, the syntax for both keyword arguments and hashes is that you have the key, which is a symbol, and then the value, which is whatever you want the value to be, and a in a hash or in keyword arguments, a symbol in Ruby can be expressed as just a oh, I don't know what you call it. It's just text followed by a colon.
Okay. And
I don't
so
know how well that answers your question.
but I could write this like this way. Is this almost or no?
If you take away the quantity equals part, yeah, all the way, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So
Yes,
that's just as a not as a keyword,
right, as a
right?
positional
As
argument.
a positional argument. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I'll add back in the okay. That
Okay,
makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, let's run that again and see what we get. Okay, I'll let you interpret that one.
I love how it just literally tells you every time what's the next problem, what's the
Hmm.
next.
So the method quantity is not defined on the recipe item object.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll probably have to write a quantity um, method.
Okay.
Uh,
Method.
yeah, method.
Hey, yo, Step.
Hey, yeah, I just noticed the email, so extremely late today.
Oh yeah, no problem. You'll still at least get to catch the last 2 minutes.
Still better than me. I no show.
Um, okay. So now we have our quantity method.
Hmm. Uh, should that take the quantity argument? Um,
Okay. So what again was the error message we just got?
a no method error for the
Okay.
recipe object.
Okay, and what's the
Yeah.
absolute minimum we have to do to make that error go away?
Have a quantity method exist?
Yeah.
Okay. So could I run it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we don't have
So
anything in the method. So,
yeah, so now we get like our real failure message, which is we expected one certain value and we're getting nil instead.
right.
Yeah, and I actually coded a little bit of this myself, and either I'm ignorant of some simple way to do it, but I found this surprisingly complicated to get this stuff to work how it should.
The
So I just say
reducible
that, I guess, for
fractions.
expectation setting. What's that?
For the reducible fractions, like converting them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I thought maybe Ruby would just have some built-in way to do it, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'll try.
Yeah, and we're about at time here, so I'll if you want, you can do that part as homework, and
Okay.
then if you want to do more sessions, we can pick back up and kind of pick back up where we left off.
Oh, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and Michael, do you have my scheduling link? If you want to grab another time, you can use that same link.
Yeah, I think I do. I think I have it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And a lot of people come and they do a session and they're like, this was great. And then I say, let's do it again. And they're like, yeah. And then they like never pick another time on my calendar and I never see them again. Um, so I hope that's not you. I hope you actually pick a time. I don't know if people like don't want to impose or something like that, but don't feel like you're
Impose.
imposing. This helps
Yeah.
me just as
Yeah.
much as it helps you. It gives me content for my YouTube channel.
No, I plan on being back.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope I get that manuscript too. Do I get one for attending?
Yeah, if you send me an email, Roger, I can either you can rely on me remembering to send it to you, which is not a very safe bet, or you can email me and that'll help me remember.
All right, can I DM you?
Yeah, you can DM me.
All right.
And real quick, since I'm terrible with emails, Ostap, I think you sent me an email. Do I have that right?
Oh yeah, I did in the past. Yeah, I had an interesting question for Ruby on Rails devs, but I think I've got it sorted now.
Okay. Yeah, well, if you wanna spend some time talking about stuff, we can do one of these with you too. There's like, I don't know if you happen to have seen it, but there's like a mentorship page on codewithjason.com. So you can just fill out that form and then we can schedule something and you can do one of these if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I can still share that question and curious about what solutions would you use, and maybe I can find some other questions. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and we sadly don't have time now, but in a future session, I'm definitely happy to get into it.
Michael, I sent a link. Please click on it. It'll help you with the fractions.
I opened that up already. Thank you.
Roger, can you send me that link too?
Yeah, it's in the Zoom, but I'll DM it because I got to DM
Oh,
you.
it's in Zoom. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, okay, before we sign off, a word from our sponsor. So one of the reasons I do these YouTube videos is for advertisement for my consulting work, which is how I make my living. A lot of my work is like advisory type stuff. And so I help people think through things like this. Sometimes it's low level coding stuff. Sometimes it's higher level, like, for example, testing strategy or something like that. Um, Sometimes I work with like CTOs who have a team, and it's like, all right, I have a team of Rails developers and they're doing some testing right now, but they're not at the same level of skill and I'm not sure if we're doing it the best and stuff like that. Can you come like help us learn or like help me like wrangle my team and put together a strategy to help them learn? Because it's not enough to just say like, hey, go get some books and stuff like that. Like that's not successful. You need like a teaching strategy to get everybody on the same page and teach them how to work and stuff like that. So I help with that kind of thing. It varies quite a bit, but the main people that I usually help are technical startup founders. So again, startup CTOs or like a technical startup CEO. Those are the kinds of people I help. And dear viewer, if you're interested in talking with me about that or just learning what it's all about, you don't have to be interested in actually hiring me. You can go to codewithjason.com and there's a link for my consulting on there where you can read a bit more and you can contact me. All right, thanks everybody for joining me today, and I will see you next time.
Thanks, Jason.